A colossal stone archway was never just a door. It was the original social media profile, carved in stone. Ancient gates measured your status long before you spoke a single word. This video will give you a new lens to view history, transforming every ruin from a pile of stones into a vibrant story of power and ambition. You will learn the secret language of architecture, from the intimidating corridors of Hattusa to the celestial blue of Babylon. How did a simple entrance become a tool for psychological control? And why did kings spend fortunes on gates that offered no real defense? What silent message does the most famous doorway you walk through every day send about you? The very first gates were little more than breaks in a wall, a necessary vulnerability for a community to live and trade. Imagine a simple gap in a mud brick barrier, guarded perhaps, but fundamentally just an opening designed to be sealed shut when danger approached. Its job was purely functional, a matter of survival, but then something profound shifted in the human story. As societies grew more complex, with kings rising above farmers and priests commanding reverence, the gate stopped being just a door. It became a stage. The earliest rulers, perhaps without even fully realizing it, understood the psychology of arrival. An unadorned opening offered safety, but a decorated one projected an idea. It told every approaching traveler, ally, or enemy that the people behind this wall were not just safe, they were organized, wealthy, and powerful. They had the resources and the skill to turn necessity into a monument. This was the birth of architectural theater, where the function of security was seamlessly blended with the performance of power. That simple gap in the wall was now a curated experience, designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. The very materials used in its construction became part of this new language, speaking volumes about a kingdom's reach and ambition. That gleaming bronze surface was far more than a defensive shell. It was a deliberate and shocking statement. In an age of wood and stone, the Assyrians chose to plate their city gates in bronze, a metal so costly it was practically a form of currency. Imagine the sun blazing off those vast metal-sheathed doors, visible for miles across the flat plains. To any approaching army or caravan, that blinding reflection was not just light, it was a message. It screamed that this kingdom possessed wealth so vast it could be literally nailed to the front door, and it possessed the military confidence to flaunt that treasure without fear of theft. This was psychological warfare long before the first arrow was ever fired, but the message of materials began even deeper with the very bones of the earth. Look at the Lion Gate of Mycenae, built from limestone blocks so colossal they spawned myths of one-eyed giants. The true marvel is not just the size of these stones, but the sheer, jaw-dropping effort required to get them there. Quarrying them from a distant hillside, hauling them over rugged terrain using only ropes, logs, and human sweat, then lifting them into place with perfect precision. This entire monumental process was a public performance. Every citizen and every visitor understood that only a leader with absolute control over a massive, organized workforce could achieve such a feat. The gate's weight was not measured in tons, but in the thousands of days of labor it represented, a permanent advertisement of the king's power over his people. Why use common wood when you could use rare stone, and why use stone when you could use precious metal? Each step up in material was a step up the social ladder, transforming a functional barrier into a physical manifestation of a kingdom's economic reach. This was a language everyone could understand, even if they could not read. And once the material had set the stage, the rulers of the ancient world began to write their stories directly onto its surface. Stone itself could speak, and its vocabulary was carved in relief. With the foundations of power laid in bronze and colossal stone, rulers turned to the surfaces of their gates to write a permanent press release. These inscriptions and carvings were not mere decoration, they were eternal propaganda, designed to outlive the king himself and speak to generations yet unborn. High on a sheer cliff face along a major royal road in Persia, King Darius the Great commissioned the Behistun inscription. This was not a hidden message, it was a declaration meant to be seen. Carved impossibly high, its very inaccessibility was part of its power, stating that the king's words were literally above the common man. The text, in 3 different languages, detailed his right to rule and his victory over rebels. It was the ancient equivalent of a national broadcast, chiseled into the landscape for eternity. For the vast majority of travelers who could not read, the gates of Babylon provided a different kind of literature. Their surfaces shimmered with glazed brick reliefs of mythical beasts, the Mushachek letter 1 E2 Bushachek U dragons, and images of the king as a victorious hunter and pious servant of the gods. This was a carefully crafted narrative in visual form. A farmer bringing his goods to market did not need to understand cuneiform to get the message. The towering, supernatural creatures guarding the entrance proclaimed divine protection, while the repeated image of the king in poses of strength and authority taught a simple lesson: this man rules with the backing of the gods and the force of his army. Submit and be in awe. This use of art as a political tool made every gate a billboard for the state, a silent educator for every single person who passed beneath its arch. And beyond these static images, the very act of moving through such a gate was a choreographed performance of power. You did not just walk through these gates, you performed a ritual. The structure itself directed your movement and dictated your emotions. Beyond the terrifying carvings and expensive materials, the very shape of the entrance was a masterclass in psychological control. Take the Lion Gate at Hattusa, the Hittite capital. It was not a simple opening you could stride through with confidence. Instead, it was a long, narrow corridor, a stone throat flanked by towering walls and looming guard towers. To enter, you were funneled into single file, your shoulders nearly brushing the cold, immense stone blocks on either side. Your field of vision was ruthlessly narrowed, forcing your gaze upward at the defenders peering down from the ramparts. In that cramped, shadowy passage, you were no longer a proud merchant or a visiting diplomat. You were small, you were exposed, and you were utterly aware of your own vulnerability. This was not an accident of design, it was the entire point. The journey did not end with making you feel small. Often, the path would deliberately twist and turn, blocking any glimpse of the glorious city within. You would navigate this intimidating corridor with no reward, your anticipation and anxiety mounting with every step. Then, at the final turn, the view would erupt before you, the palace, the temples, the bustling heart of power, all revealed in a single, overwhelming spectacle. That dramatic reveal was not for your enjoyment, it was a final, calculated lesson. It reinforced the absolute control of the ruler who decided what you could see and when you could see it. He owned the vista just as he owned the ground you walked on. This manipulation of space was a silent, physical form of theater, designed to humble every visitor before they even laid eyes on the king. And this architectural control was perfectly paired with another, more direct form of power, the regulation of who was allowed to walk this path in the first place. A gatekeeper was far more than a simple sentry with a spear. He was the living, breathing extension of the gate's power, a ceremonial bouncer for the ancient world. His job was not merely to watch the door, but to actively curate who passed through it, enforcing a strict social hierarchy in real time. While the massive stones and glittering reliefs spoke of timeless power, the gatekeeper dealt in the daily, humiliating theater of access. Imagine a wealthy merchant arriving with his caravan laden with silks and spices. He did not simply ride in. He was stopped, questioned, and his goods were inspected. The gatekeeper, often a trusted official with significant civic authority, had the power to levy taxes on the spot and decide if the merchant's business was welcome or a threat. This process was a public spectacle for everyone else waiting in line. A grand entrance gracefully granted to a visiting diplomat was a display of favor and alliance. But an entrance denied, a merchant turned away with his goods, was a brutal and public shaming. It reinforced the most fundamental social boundary: you are either inside the circle of power or you are outside of it. The gatekeeper made that distinction clear every single day. His authority was often tied to the rhythm of the city itself, to the specific hours when the gates were open. When the great doors swung shut at dusk, the power to grant passage vanished, and the symbolic wall around the community became absolute once more. The creak of massive hinges and the thud of a great bar sliding into place were the city's heartbeat. This daily ritual of opening and closing the gates was a powerful, non-verbal broadcast of control. At dawn, the unlocking was a public promise of safety and commerce, an invitation into the ordered world within. At dusk, the sealing was a statement of finality, a reminder that the authority which granted access could also revoke it. This control over time itself was a profound declaration of power. The city lived and breathed on a schedule set by its rulers. Special occasions amplified this symbolism to a grand scale. When a triumphant general returned from battle, the gates were thrown open wide, a symbolic embrace of victory and a public display of favor. Conversely, in times of plague, invasion, or internal rebellion, the sealed gates became a symbol of collective anxiety and exclusion. They physically defined the line between safety and peril, between us and them. This mastery of temporal access was a constant, subtle lesson for every citizen. But the symbolism of movement did not end with timing. The very direction you traveled through the gate carried its own heavy meaning. No defensive wall ever connected to the Arch of Titus in Rome. This grand stone structure stood alone, a gate that led from one part of the city to another, its only true purpose to celebrate a single man's moment of glory. It was the ultimate evolution of the gate's symbolic power, completely detached from the mundane need for security. Here, the entire concept of an entrance was re-engineered as a massive, permanent trophy. Its elaborate carvings depict Roman soldiers carrying the golden menorah from the sacked temple in Jerusalem, a parade of conquest frozen in stone for eternity. Every citizen who walked beneath its shadow was participating in a reenactment of the emperor's triumph, breathing life into his victory long after the real parade had faded into memory. This was status carved into the heart of the empire itself, a monument to one man that outlived his entire dynasty. Yet this Roman innovation was merely the most famous example of a principle understood for millennia. Long before the first Roman arch was conceived, the pharaohs of Egypt had mastered the art of the symbolic gateway. Their massive pylon gates, fronting immense temples, were not built to keep people out, but to impress upon them the insurmountable distance between mortal lives and the divine power of the king. The Ishtar Gate was a piece of the cosmos brought down to earth. Its surface shimmered with a lapis lazuli blue so vibrant it seemed to capture a piece of the sky itself, a color created from rare cobalt and fired onto thousands of glazed bricks. This was not a simple paint job, it was an astronomical expense and a theological statement. The deep blue background was sacred to the god of the heavens, Anu, while the alternating rows of golden mus letter 1e2 Bushku dragons and bulls represented the gods Marduk and Adad. Every symbolic creature was a glazed tile in a massive, divine mosaic. To walk the processional way through this gate was to be immersed in a living cosmology, a path where myth and masonry became one. You were not merely entering a city, you were participating in a ritual, moving through a celestial order made manifest by King Nebuchadnezzar II. The overwhelming sensory experience, the sheer scale, and the unearthly color was designed to do more than impress you. It was meant to overwhelm your senses and stun you into a state of reverence. The message was clear: the king who commanded such beauty and channeled such divine power was far more than a political leader. He was the essential link between the people and the gods, the sole custodian of their favor. This fusion of religion and raw political authority was a masterstroke, turning a physical threshold into a spiritual one. The gate's grandeur was not for every entrance, it was reserved for this sacred path, making the act of crossing its boundary the most important journey in the city. This principle of using overwhelming splendor to communicate power was not unique to Babylon. It was a universal language spoken by empires across the ancient world. Even a democracy needed a grand entrance. The Propylaea, the magnificent gateway to the Athenian Acropolis, stands as a powerful contradiction in stone. Constructed under the leadership of Pericles in the 5th century BCE, this was not the project of a single, all-powerful king. It was a civic monument funded by the treasury of a democratic state, a testament to the collective wealth and pride of its citizens. Its purpose was not to intimidate foreign diplomats, though it certainly did that, but to welcome Athenian citizens themselves during great religious festivals like the Panathenaea. The power it projected was cultural and intellectual, a declaration that Athens was the school of Greece. Yet, for all its democratic intentions, the experience of approaching the Propylaea was still one of profound separation. Its soaring marble columns and grand staircase did not blend with the city below. They created a distinct threshold, lifting the citizen from the mundane, bustling agora up into the sacred, rarefied air of the citadel. This was a hierarchy of experience, not of birthright. The gate reminded every participant that the glorious achievements of Athenian democracy, the plays, the philosophy, the art, existed on a plane far above ordinary life. It measured the status of the entire polis against the rest of the world, proclaiming that their collective way of life was the pinnacle of human civilization. This principle of using an entrance to define a space and its occupants was not confined to city walls or sacred temples. The very same psychology of the gate extended inward into the most personal domains of the ancient world. A Roman aristocrat's home did not have a front door, it had a vestibule. This small, often ornate chamber just inside the entrance was the domestic version of the city gate's intimidating corridor. A visitor did not step directly into the warmth of the household. They were first held in this liminal space, their arrival announced to the master of the house. The time you spent waiting in that vestibule, surrounded by displays of the family's ancestry and wealth, was a deliberate measure of your importance. You were being sized up by the architecture itself. This scaling down of symbolic power repeated itself across the ancient world. In China, the residence of a government official was not marked by a simple doorway but by an elaborate gatehouse within a walled compound. The number of pillars, the style of the roof, and even the color of the tiles were dictated by sumptuary laws, legal codes that precisely defined what each rank in society was permitted to display. You could literally read a man's status from the street, seeing his place in the imperial hierarchy carved into the woodwork over his head. This was social status made manifest, a permanent, unchangeable part of the city's fabric. In medieval Europe, the castle gatehouse reached its most psychologically potent form. Its murder holes and portcullises were genuine defensive features, but their effect on a peaceful visitor was just as calculated as on a charging knight. A merchant or a low-ranking vassal arriving for an audience would be made to wait in the cold, shadowy outer bailey, staring up at the sheer, unassailable stone walls. The slow, grinding process of being granted entry through multiple gates and checkpoints was a ritual of submission. It taught the same lesson as the gates of Hattusa, but on a personal level, the Lord you are here to see holds absolute power over your movement, your time, and by extension, your life. This miniaturization of gate symbolism reveals something profound. The drive to use an entrance as a social measuring tape is not just a quirk of kings and emperors, it is embedded deep in human psychology. We instinctively understand that control over a threshold is control over a relationship. The locked door, the gated community, the executive waiting room, these are all modern echoes of the same ancient impulse to define who is in, who is out, and exactly where everyone stands. The ultimate measure of status was not wealth or power, but proximity to the gods. While a city gate could exclude you based on your social rank, a temple gate could declare you spiritually unworthy. These were the thresholds to the divine, and they enforced the most profound segregation of all, the separation between the sacred and the profane. Nowhere is this more evident than in the colossal pylons of an Egyptian temple. Those two massive, sloping towers framing the entrance were not just architectural features, they were a symbolic representation of the horizon, the place where the sun god Ra emerged at dawn. To walk between them was to leave the mundane world of time and decay and step into the eternal, ordered realm of the divine. But that step was a privilege granted to very few. For the average Egyptian, the journey ended at the gate. Only the pharaoh, believed to be a living god himself, and the priests who served him were permitted to cross that boundary and enter the inner courtyards and darkened sanctuaries. The gate was a literal barrier, its towering presence a constant public reminder of a spiritual hierarchy where most people were permanently on the outside looking in. This exclusion was not merely a matter of protocol, it was reinforced by ritual. In many ancient traditions from the Levant to Greece, passing through a sacred gate required purification. You might have to wash your hands, change your clothing, or offer a prayer, transforming the simple, physical act of stepping through a doorway into a profound spiritual transition. It cleansed you, making you worthy to stand in a space inhabited by a deity. This process clearly demarcated who was pure enough for divine communion and who was not, turning the gate into a filter for the soul. The power of this symbolism was so absolute that it bled directly into mythology and literature. Think of the stories where a hero must pass through a monstrous gate guarded by a sphinx or a chimera. These are not just exciting tales, they are metaphors for this universal human experience, the terrifying, guarded threshold between the world we know and a realm of unimaginable power. The gatekeeper, whether a stone pylon or a mythical beast, held the ultimate authority, deciding who was worthy to cross over. A gate in a myth is the ultimate test of character. Far from the dusty plains of Babylon or the marble steps of Athens, these legendary barriers exist not to measure wealth or political rank, but to weigh the very substance of a person's soul. The ancient Greeks spoke of two gates for dreams, one fashioned from ivory and the other from polished horn. False, misleading dreams were said to pass through the gate of ivory, while true prophetic visions emerged only through the gate of horn. This was not a story about architecture, it was a profound metaphor for discernment, where the gate itself acted as a divine filter, separating truth from illusion. This idea resonates powerfully with the pearly gates of later tradition, a celestial checkpoint where entry is granted not by social standing but by moral worth. These stories elevate the gate from a physical barrier to a spiritual arbiter. They are the final, perfected form of the judgment we saw at the city gate, stripping away all worldly pretenses to ask one simple, terrifying question: are you worthy? This archetype fuels the heart of the hero's journey across countless cultures. A hero never simply walks into the unknown. They must first pass through a threshold guardian, a monstrous sphinx posing a riddle, a crumbling archway that only the pure of heart can enter, or a narrow cave mouth that symbolizes the birth into a new world. To cross this boundary is to shed an old identity and embrace a new one. The gate is the moment of transformation, the point of no return. These foundational stories did not emerge from a vacuum. They are the direct echo of lived human experience, born in a world where every significant transition, from entering a city to approaching a god, was controlled by a literal, imposing gateway. The physical reality of being judged, excluded, or granted access at a stone archway for thousands of years carved these patterns deep into our cultural consciousness. We internalize the gate as the ultimate symbol of transition and judgment. So what happens when we, surrounded by glass and steel, walk through the shadow of these ancient ideas? Our modern gaze often strips these stone giants of their original menace. We stand before the Lion Gate at Mycenae and admire the massive lintel, the skillful corbelling, but we no longer feel the cold dread it was designed to inspire. We see a ruin, not an active instrument of social control. To the Bronze Age traveler, that gate was not a relic, it was a current event, a stark declaration of a king's absolute power over life and death. Restoring this understanding is like putting on a pair of archaeological glasses. Suddenly, the silent stones begin to speak. The narrowness of a passageway is no longer just a defensive feature, it is a calculated psychological squeeze. The height of a threshold is not an architectural quirk, it is a deliberate hurdle meant to make you watch your step. This perspective allows us to reconstruct the lived experience of hierarchy, to feel the weight of that power pressing down on every visitor who passed beneath the carved lions. It reminds us that buildings are never neutral, they are frozen ideology. Every archway, every courtyard, every locked door is a physical argument about who holds power and who must submit. This ancient language of stone and status did not vanish with the fall of empires. It simply found new forms, whispering the same old truths in the materials of our own world. The corporate lobby you enter today is a direct descendant of the Imperial Gate. Its soaring glass walls and vast marble floors are not merely a matter of taste, they are a carefully engineered statement of economic power. A visitor is immediately struck by the sheer, wasteful volume of the space, an atrium so high and empty it serves no function other than to impress. The materials whisper of global reach: Italian marble, tropical hardwood, polished steel, all curated to tell you that this company commands resources on a scale you can barely comprehend. This is the modern equivalent of Nebuchadnezzar's lapis lazuli blue, a deliberate display of wealth designed to make a client feel fortunate to be granted an audience and to make a competitor feel unnervingly small. The psychological journey is just as calculated as the one through the Hittite gatehouse. You are funneled toward a single, vast reception desk, your path observed by silent security and the quiet hum of surveillance. You announce yourself to a gatekeeper who controls all access, their smile a professional form of the ancient sentry's scrutiny. You are then made to wait in a strategically placed seating area, a modern vestibule where the time you spend is a quiet measure of your importance. Every element is choreographed to reinforce a hierarchy before a single word of business is ever spoken. This same ancient language is spoken in the quiet streets of a gated community. The wall and the guarded checkpoint are marketed as security features, and while they offer a degree of that, their primary function is often social filtration. The gate itself is a physical, permanent line drawn in the landscape, declaring a clear separation between those who belong inside and those who do not. It is a symbol of exclusion that harks back to the sumptuary laws of ancient China, where the style of your gateway announced your rank. Here, the gate measures status not by imperial decree, but by net worth and social standing. It creates a curated environment, an inside defined by its separation from the outside. The message is not subtle. This is a space for a certain class of people, and your ability to pass the gate is the ultimate proof that you are one of them. Even the most fleeting modern gate carries the same symbolic weight. Unroll a strip of red carpet and you have instantly created a temporary yet potent threshold. This flimsy fabric, guarded by velvet ropes and stern security, performs the same function as the grand processional way of Babylon. It separates the anointed, the celebrities, and the VIPs from the general public, the spectators. The act of walking the red carpet is a ritual of arrival, a public performance of status where the gate is not made of stone, but of flashbulbs and adulation. It is a perfect example of how the core psychology of the gate persists, even when its physical form is reduced to a symbol. These physical echoes are powerful, but the most profound evolution of the gate is happening in a realm with no stone and no doors. The digital world has constructed its own ethereal, yet equally powerful archways. Your social media profile is the new city gate. It is the first thing people see, a digital facade that announces your status before you ever send a message or post a comment. A high follower count is the modern equivalent of towering stone walls, signaling a wide sphere of influence. A coveted blue verification badge acts as a royal seal, an official endorsement that grants you access to a more privileged tier of the platform, separating the recognized voice from the anonymous crowd. These are not just features, they are the new heraldry, the digital symbols that measure your place in a virtual kingdom. And just like the ancient gatekeeper who decided who could enter the city, algorithms now stand as the invisible sentries of our online world. They do not carry spears, they process data. These complex formulas silently observe your every click, like, and pause, learning your desires and prejudices. Then they open a custom gate just for you, deciding which news stories you will read, which friends' updates you will see, and which products you might buy. You are no longer walking a single grand processional way. You are being guided down a personalized corridor, its walls built from your own past behavior. This is access control on a scale no pharaoh could have dreamed of, a gate that reshapes itself for every single person. Another form of digital gate is even more direct. The paywall is the ultimate economic barrier. When you click on a news article or a research paper only to be blocked by a demand for a subscription, you are facing a gatekeeper as powerful as any Roman centurion. This gate does not measure your social rank or moral purity, it measures your credit card. It declares that valuable information and culture are not a public right, but a private commodity. Access is granted not by who you are, but by what you can pay. This creates a new kind of social stratification, a world where the well-informed are those who can afford the monthly fee, and everyone else is left outside with only fragments of the story. These digital gates prove that the ancient psychology of the threshold is more resilient than stone or steel. We have not abandoned the impulse to build gates, we have simply abstracted them. The fundamental human drives to signal our status, to control access, and to define communities have seamlessly migrated into the code that shapes our lives. This silent evolution forces us to ask, in a world of endless virtual doorways, who truly holds the keys? That gleaming blue gate did more than just dazzle visitors. It dictated the entire layout of the city. The placement of a main gate was the first stroke in the urban planner's design, a decision that would shape the city's economic and social geography for generations. The most important gates, like the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, did not open onto random, winding alleys. They were the starting points for vast, straight processional ways, wide avenues designed for grand religious parades and the movement of armies. And where the elite and the divine traveled, commerce and prestige naturally followed. These boulevards became the city's most desirable addresses, instantly transforming the land around them. Temples and palaces clustered along this sacred path, their own grandeur amplified by the glorious approach. Wealthy merchants and high-ranking officials built their lavish homes here, wanting to be seen in the city's most celebrated corridor. This created a self-perpetuating cycle of prestige, where the Grand Gate actively generated the city's most exclusive district. The gate was not a passive marker at the edge of town. It was a powerful magnet, pulling wealth and status toward itself and arranging the city in a clear, visible hierarchy of importance. Meanwhile, on the other side of the same city walls, a smaller, plainer gate offered a completely different experience. This was the gate for commerce and labor, often located downwind from the elite districts to carry away the smells and sounds of industry. Through this humble opening flowed livestock, raw materials, and goods for the common markets. The streets leading from it were narrow, unpaved, and crowded, winding directly into industrial quarters and densely packed residential neighborhoods for artisans and laborers. Your daily journey through the city was predetermined by your social class. A wealthy priest lived on the gleaming processional way and entered through the glorious main gate. A potter lived in a dusty lane and used the utilitarian gate, his path never crossing the spaces reserved for the elite. This was not an accident of urban growth, it was a deliberate architecture of segregation. The city itself, through its gates and the streets they spawned, taught you your place every single day. It physically prevented the mixing of classes, ensuring that the spatial divide between the wealthy avenue and the crowded alley became a permanent feature of the social landscape. This urban design was a powerful, long-term investment in social control. A king who built a magnificent gate was not just creating a beautiful monument, he was laying down the literal groundwork for his legacy. He was ensuring that the social order he commanded would be physically carved into the city's map, influencing the flow of people, goods, and ideas for centuries after his death. The gate became a fixed point, an immovable anchor around which all future development would have to orient itself. The construction of these monumental thresholds was itself a society-defining event. The quarrying, transportation, and lifting of multi-ton stone blocks required the mobilization of thousands of workers, from skilled stonemasons to endless lines of laborers. This was more than a building project. It was a massive, city-wide ritual that demonstrated the state's absolute power to command the time and effort of its entire population. The gate's very existence was a testament to that control, a permanent reminder of the king who could reshape the very earth and, in doing so, reshape the society that lived upon it. That shimmering blue glaze and those perfectly carved lines did not appear by magic. They were born from the calloused hands and broken backs of thousands. A king's grand vision for a gate was a declaration of war against nature itself, a battle fought not with swords but with ropes, sledges, and sheer human endurance. To quarry a single limestone block for a Mycenaean lintel, workers would first carve deep channels around it using stone hammers and chisels. Then they would drive wooden wedges into these grooves and soak them with water. As the wood expanded with a groan, it would slowly, agonizingly fracture the stone from the living bedrock. This was just the beginning. Moving a 100-ton block required a small army. They would lever it onto a wooden sledge, then place this sledge on a track of greased logs. Teams of men, sometimes 200 strong, would then pull on heavy ropes, inching the colossal weight forward a few feet at a time, while others constantly rushed to move the logs from the back to the front. This was a Sisyphean task of unimaginable tedium and danger, a single misstep meaning crushed limbs or death. The organizational capacity to sustain this effort for years, to feed, house, and command these vast workforces, was a power display in its own right. A society that could pull 10,000 men from farming and fighting to drag rocks was a society with a staggering surplus of labor and food. The gate was therefore a pyramid in miniature, its grandeur built on a foundation of forced or conscripted toil. The story of its materials adds another cruel layer of meaning. That lapis like blue on the Ishtar Gate came from cobalt, a mineral likely mined in distant, hostile deserts. The cedar wood for a pharaoh's gateposts was hauled from the mountains of Lebanon, a journey of hundreds of miles. Every rare material was a testament to a kingdom's far-reaching tentacles, its ability to command not just its own people, but trade networks stretching across the known world. The gate stood as a brutal ledger of human cost, a beautiful, silent monument to the countless unnamed individuals whose lives were spent to make one man's status visible for eternity. The most expensive gate was a story written in materials from beyond the horizon. A king building with local limestone was powerful, but a king who paneled his doors with fragrant cedar from Lebanon or inlaid them with lapis lazuli from Afghanistan was making a completely different kind of statement. He was proving his reach extended far beyond his own borders, showcasing a web of trade and diplomacy that spanned continents. This was not just architecture, it was a geopolitical map rendered in wood and stone. A gate built from exotic materials was the ultimate flex, a permanent, public display of a kingdom's ability to command resources from the very edges of the known world. It transformed the entrance from a symbol of local power into a monument of global influence, a physical trophy case for the rare and the remote. The Roman appetite for colored marble offers a stunning example. An emperor might demand granite from the deserts of Egypt, green cipollino from the Greek island of Euboea, and yellow marble from Tunisia, all for the columns of a single triumphal arch. The sheer logistical nightmare of quarrying these massive stones, loading them onto ships, and transporting them across the treacherous Mediterranean was a testament to Roman engineering, but it was also a brutal demonstration of imperial control. Each colorful stone was a silent, stubborn piece of conquered territory, hauled back to the capital and set in place for every citizen to see. The gate became a collection of subjugated landscapes, a mosaic of the empire itself. This global sourcing added a profound new layer to the status equation. It was no longer enough to be rich, you had to be connected. A gate told everyone where you stood on the world stage. Could you only afford the wood from the local forest, or could you commission a fleet to bring you the scented cedars of a distant mountain range? The answer was carved into the entrance for all to see, a permanent record of your kingdom's place in a vast and competitive ancient world. The silence of a sacred gateway could be more intimidating than any battle cry. As you approached the innermost pylon of an Egyptian temple, the bustling noise of the city would fade into an unnerving, profound quiet, broken only by the whisper of priestly robes or the faint chime of a sistrum. This was not an absence of sound, but a deliberate, enforced void, a sonic curtain that separated the chaos of the profane world from the perfect order of the divine. The ability to command such silence, to carve a pocket of absolute hush in a noisy world, was a breathtaking display of control. It told you that you were now in a place where even the air obeyed a higher authority. This auditory control was the flip side of a much louder, more public spectacle. The great bronze-sheathed doors of an Assyrian palace did not close with a click, but with a deep, resonant boom that echoed across courtyards and into the very bones of those standing nearby. That sound was not merely functional, it was a sonic signature of power, a percussive statement that decisions were final and boundaries were absolute. It was the sound of law itself. Between these two extremes of noise and silence lay a whole spectrum of controlled sound that defined the gate experience. A herald standing beside the main gate, his voice projecting official proclamations and the names of approved visitors, was a living instrument of the state. His announcements transformed the chaotic noise of a crowd into an ordered list, granting some the honor of entry while audibly excluding others. The soundscape itself was a social filter. Inside the gate, the sudden cacophony of the market, the braying of donkeys, and the calls of merchants created a wall of sound that signified life and commerce, a reward for those allowed to pass. Every layer of this auditory environment, from the intimidating quiet of the sacred to the booming finality of the bronze door, was meticulously orchestrated. It was a multi-sensory assault designed to overwhelm not just your eyes, but your ears, ensuring you felt the power dynamics long before you ever saw the king. Power was not just seen and heard, it was smelled. Long before your eyes could register the gleam of bronze or your ears the boom of a closing door, your nose would tell you exactly where you stood in the ancient social order. The air itself was a carefully curated medium, a silent but potent broadcaster of status. Approaching a major temple complex, you would be met by a cloud of expensive, fragrant smoke. This was not a casual pleasantry, it was a calculated display. The incense burning at the gate was often made from frankincense or myrrh, resins that had to be imported from thousands of miles away at immense cost. That sweet, pervasive scent was a direct statement. It declared that this institution possessed both the divine favor to communicate with the gods and the staggering wealth to burn treasure as an offering. Every breath you took was a reminder that you were nearing a place of celestial privilege, a realm where the very atmosphere was more valuable than your entire livelihood. This olfactory theater extended to the seats of earthly power. A royal palace was not just a fortified building, it was an oasis of curated scent. The main gate might open onto elaborate Persian-style gardens, filled with fragrant flowers and herbs, their perfumes carried on the breeze. Or it might feature intricate water channels and fountains, which did more than just cool the air, they cleansed it. The gentle sound of splashing water and the smell of damp stone and blooming jasmine created a sensory world entirely separate from the city beyond the walls. Just outside that gate, the common streets would have been a cacophony of smells, the pungent odor of animal waste, the sharp tang of tanneries, the smoky haze from countless cooking fires. The palace gate marked the absolute boundary between the pure, fragrant air of power and the messy, odorous reality of everyday life. This sensory segregation was a deliberate tool. It made the elite environment feel not just different, but fundamentally better and more civilized. Your nose understood the hierarchy before your mind could even articulate it. Conversely, the gates leading to industrial or mercantile districts were anchors for the opposite sensation. The entrance to the leather working quarter would be permanently stained by the acrid smell of tanning solutions. The gate near the fish market would carry the unmistakable scent of the sea and decay. These smells were unavoidable and universally recognized as markers of lower status, labor-intensive work. The city's geography was mapped in odors, and the gates were the epicenters where these social scents were most concentrated. This manipulation of smell was a deeply primal form of communication, bypassing logic to appeal directly to our most ancient instincts about cleanliness, safety, and privilege. And at the most critical moments, this entire sensory arsenal, the sights, the sounds, and the scents, would be marshaled for a single, overwhelming performance. A stone gate could stand for centuries, but its symbolic power required constant renewal. This was the purpose of the ceremonial reenactment, a public ritual that transformed architecture into living theater. In ancient Mesopotamia, the most important of these was the New Year festival, the Akitu. The king's role was not one of simple celebration. It was a carefully scripted performance of humility and restoration. He would be ritually stripped of his regalia and slapped in the face by the high priest, a shocking act of public humiliation. Only after he had proven his piety and been reaffirmed by the gods would he lead a grand procession back through the city's main gate. This was not a defeat, but a masterstroke of political psychology. By publicly enduring this symbolic degradation and then being triumphantly restored, the king demonstrated that his power was not merely inherited or seized, but granted and renewed by divine will itself. The gate was the critical stage for this transformation, the threshold through which the humbled man passed and the reconfirmed sovereign emerged. Its archway framed the entire drama, making the stone itself a witness to the covenant between the king, the people, and the gods. This annual ritual burned the legitimacy of the ruler into the collective memory of the populace, using the gate as the central prop in a play of power that everyone understood. In other empires, the ceremony was less about humility and more about pure, unadulterated dominance. The main gate was the designated venue for receiving tribute. Conquered rulers or their ambassadors would be forced to approach the imposing entrance, often crawling or prostrating themselves, and lay their kingdom's wealth at the feet of the victor. This act, performed at the threshold, was a powerful geographic metaphor. The supplicants were literally kept outside, their gifts hauled across the boundary into the heart of the powerful city. The gate became the physical point of submission, the place where the abstract concept of conquest was made terrifyingly real for both the vanquished and the watching citizens. Every chest of gold, every exotic animal, and every captive prince presented there reinforced the gate's meaning as the mouth of a state that devoured other nations. These ceremonies ensured the architecture never became just a beautiful relic. The silent stones were given a voice each year, shouting the same message of order, divinity, and dominance to a new generation. This constant reactivation of the gate's symbolism was a social and psychological maintenance program for the entire civilization, a way to keep the hierarchy feeling as permanent and unchallengeable as the lintels themselves. A stone gate was more than a landmark, it was a courthouse. In the ancient world, the city gate was the beating heart of the legal system, the central stage where a community's laws were enacted, interpreted, and enforced. This was not a metaphorical role. The thick stone walls of the gateway created a natural amphitheater for public life, a space where elders and judges would sit to hear cases and settle disputes over property, theft, or personal injury. The very act of holding court at this specific location was deeply symbolic. Justice was not a private matter hidden away in a back room. It was a public performance conducted at the threshold of the community, visible to all who entered and left. This location broadcast a powerful message that the law was the foundation of the city's identity, the first thing you encountered and the final authority you answered to. The gate's legal function transformed it into a living institution, a place where abstract rules gained physical force. This is vividly captured in the Hebrew Bible, where kings like David are described as holding court at the city gate, and where the Book of Ruth details a legal transaction finalized by one party removing his sandal and handing it to the other as a public witness before the elders at the gate. This ritual, performed at that specific spot, made the agreement legally binding and socially recognized. The gate was the ultimate witness, its stones serving as silent, permanent guarantors of the contracts sworn before it. But the law of the gate was not only about judgment, it was also about mercy. In many cultures, the gateposts themselves offered a form of sacred protection. A person fleeing vengeance or persecution could grasp the hinges of the city gate and claim the right of asylum. By touching this liminal structure, a supplicant placed themselves under the legal and spiritual authority of the city itself, seeking sanctuary from the chaos outside. This practice elevated the gate from a simple barrier into a symbol of civilized order, a place where raw power was, in theory, tempered by codified rules and divine principles. The design of these gateways often reflected their judicial purpose. Many featured broad, open plazas just inside the main arch, spacious areas designed to accommodate crowds of citizens gathered to hear a royal proclamation or witness a legal proceeding. Seats for elders were sometimes carved directly into the gate's foundational stones, physically embedding the administration of justice into the architecture. Every element was arranged to facilitate the community's most important civic rituals, making the gate the physical and legal anchor of the entire social order. The stone benches lining the inner walls of a gate were far more than a place to rest. They were the thrones of civic authority, the literal seats of judgment where elders and officials presided over the daily life of the community. Imagine a merchant bringing a complaint against a neighbor, or a dispute over a property boundary being settled not in a private chamber, but here in the open air, with the entire comings and goings of the city as a backdrop. This public nature of justice was crucial. It transformed the law from an abstract concept into a visible, audible process that everyone witnessed while entering or leaving. The gate was not just a symbol of power, it was its most active office. Carved niches set into the gate's massive pillars served a similar, yet more spiritual purpose. These alcoves were not empty. They likely held statues of patron gods, deified heroes, or revered ancestors, their stone eyes watching over all who passed. This sanctified the entire space, merging divine oversight with human judgment. To swear an oath or testify in a case while standing before the image of a god made truth-telling a sacred duty, with consequences that stretched into the afterlife. The gate became a crossroads of the mortal and the divine, where every legal decision carried the weight of heavenly approval. This fusion of furniture and function created a true civic center. The gate was a courthouse, a town hall, and a sacred shrine all rolled into one monumental archway. The act of passing through was thus layered with meaning. You were not only moving from outside to inside, you were navigating the very institutions that held your society together. You were subject to its laws, under the gaze of its gods, and mindful of its social order with every single step. This is why the deliberate destruction of a city's gate was such a catastrophic and symbolic act for a conquering army. It was not merely a breach in the wall. To smash these benches and deface these niches was to shatter the very heart of civic life. It was an attack on the community's ability to govern itself, to enact justice, and to maintain its connection to the divine. The fallen stones represented more than a military defeat. They signaled the utter collapse of a world order. An enemy did not merely break down a gate, they shattered its story. The ultimate proof of a gate's power as a status symbol was the profound humiliation of its destruction. To breach that monumental archway was to violate everything it represented: the king's honor, the city's divine protection, and the very social order it enforced. This is why conquering armies did not just record the burning of temples or the capture of kings. They meticulously documented the smashing of gates. The annals of the Assyrian kings are filled with boasts of setting fire to the magnificent cedar doors of their enemies, of shattering their bronze-sheathed panels with battering rams. This was not simple military reporting, it was psychological warfare for an international audience. Every other kingdom that heard the news understood the message: we did not just defeat their army, we erased their facade of power and exposed them as weak and abandoned by their gods. The destruction was a deliberate, symbolic act meant to strip a culture of its public face. But the story does not end with the broken stones. A city that survived a siege and then rebuilt its gates was sending a message just as powerful as the one who destroyed them. The act of raising new, even taller walls and more ornate gateways was a defiant declaration of resilience. It stated, in stone and mortar, that the community's identity and status had not just survived, they had been reforged stronger than before. This life cycle of construction, maintenance, and destruction reveals the gate as a living barometer of a society's fortunes. Its pristine condition reflected a kingdom at its peak. Its scars and repairs told a story of survival, and its rubble marked the end of an era. The legacy of these structures is therefore written not only in their grandeur, but in their ruins, a permanent record of the rise and fall of human ambition, carved into the very thresholds we built to protect ourselves. From the mud-brick portals of Jericho to the digital algorithms that curate our online lives, the gate has always been a fundamental tool for measuring and displaying our place in the world. The story of why ancient gates measured social status is far more than an archaeological puzzle. It is a key to understanding a core human impulse. We are driven to define who is inside our circle and who remains outside, to display our achievements for all to see, and to control the narrative of power itself. Every time you walk through a doorway, whether it is the simple frame of your front door or the grand arch of a public building, you are participating in a ritual of passage thousands of years in the making. You are navigating a silent language of stone and space that once determined a king's legacy and a citizen's worth. This journey through history reveals that the story of the gate is, in its deepest sense, the story of us. If this exploration has shifted how you see the thresholds in your own life, share your perspective in the comments and subscribe for more journeys into the hidden meanings of